In January 2000, we lost my dad because of a doctor's error during surgery. As we were all very close to him, this all hit us particularly hard. I decided to move back with my mom. I was 24 at the time, and I took care of her. I've been with her ever since. It has now been nearly 7 years since his death. Before my dad died, I didn't believe in anything paranormal. I believed in what I learned at church, but I did not believe in ghosts or hauntings, even though I had experienced a few inexplicable things myself. I brushed them all off as weird phenomena, but nothing to concern myself with, and certainly nothing to change my views about, until spring 2005. When my dad passed away, we began having trouble with people messing around the house. There were a few things stolen from my dad's work building, and there were 3 batteries stolen right from the vehicles while Mom and I watched out a window after placing a frantic phone call to the police. The police didn't show up until some time later, and by then, the burglars were gone. Occurrences of this nature would happen time and time again. Spring 2005, I was up late one night, 1 a.m. or later, studying for finals in my bedroom. Everything was quiet and dark. The only light on in my house was in my bedroom. We lived in a very rural area, so when it gets dark and quiet, it really gets dark and quiet. I was engrossed in my studying when my dogs began barking. I sighed, realizing that someone was probably out there, but there was really nothing I could actually do about it since we lived so far away from a police station. They had already stolen most of everything of any value, and they never had tried to get in the house before, so I went back to studying. I'd become engrossed in my studying to the point that I didn't even really notice the dogs barking anymore, when suddenly, my bedroom filled with the overwhelming scent of my dad's cologne. But it wasn't just the smell of the cologne. You know how different perfumes and colognes smell different on different people because of differentiating body chemistries? Well, this was my dad wearing the cologne. I looked up, fully expecting to see him, but nothing was there. The scent was getting stronger and stronger. It was then that I noticed the urgent pitch of the dogs barking and growling, and the rustling coming from outside underneath my bedroom window. There was someone out there. Suddenly, Daddy's scent centered at the window beside the bed where I was working, and seemed to become malevolent. Don't ask me how I know this, I just do. It's like the air seemed to crackle. It was then that I heard someone running away breakneck from the house, without even bothering to try to be quiet. The atmosphere in the room suddenly went from malevolent to peaceful, and Daddy's scent lingered for a moment, and then was gone. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I can't deny it. I would like to think that he's still here, watching over those he loves. It made me feel very safe and taken care of. Not once did I feel one bit of fear over the scent in my room. Thanks for reading. I've yet another story to tell. I guess I am susceptible to spirits and apparitions, as I've had other encounters with loved ones who have passed. This one was my very first encounter. I was going through a very bitter divorce, being only 28 and afraid to be alone with 2 very little boys. I didn't know which end was up, so to speak. It was in the summer. I had my 2 babies bathed and in bed. I decided to lay on the sofa and watch some television. I fell asleep, a pretty deep sleep at that. I was awoken by the static of the television. The station had gone off the air for the night. My baby of 10 months old had the bedroom right off of the living room. The sofa was facing his room, and he was sleeping soundly. I had a habit of keeping all of the bedroom doors open at night, so that if one of my sons cried, I would hear them. All of a sudden, the living room got so cold, like a very damp chill. A glowing light appeared at the doorway of my baby's room. Then a figure appeared, a woman, in a long white dress and dark hair. Her hair was up in an upsweep, but I couldn't make out her face. Her face was blurry, and I just couldn't see it at all. I was shocked, couldn't move, mind racing and heart pounding like crazy. I sat up on the sofa and just stared at this figure in the doorway of my baby's room. Then she spoke, only a few words, but she spoke. She said it will be all right. Then she vanished into thin air. That damp chill vanished along with the apparition. I was so shaken by this, not knowing who it was or what it was about. I eventually calmed down and put it out of my mind. A few days later, my mom and dad came up for a visit. They loved their grandbaby so much, they came to visit several times a week. We were sitting at the table in the kitchen, just chatting about anything and everything. That's when I thought of the strange happening I experienced a few nights before. I told my folks about what had happened and described the figure that I saw that night to my parents. I mentioned too how cold and damp it got in that room that night and how the chill went away when the figure went away. My dad sat there looking at me with the eyes of dinner plates and had a stunned look on his face. I asked him if he was okay. He said that he was, but he knew who that figure was. I asked him who that could have been, and he said it was his mother. He was only 7 when his mother died. She was only 34 years old. She died a week after her 9th child was born. She had all of her children in the farmhouse where her and my grandfather lived. Dad used to sit at his desk in a one-room schoolhouse and look out at her grave. The cemetery was right next door to the schoolhouse. I asked him how he knew it was his mother. He said the way I described her, wearing a long white dress, and the color and style of her hair. Her hair was dark and always in an upsweep, but this part is what really convinced me that he was right. He told me that she would always use that expression, "It will be alright," to him and his brothers and sisters when things didn't go quite right. He said he just knew it was her. He said she was comforting me and telling me that everything would get better. I was quite amazed, not only by the fact that I never saw my grandmother, but how she came to visit me in my times of need. I never had any other encounters with her after that visit, though I felt a calmness inside of me and felt somehow closer to her after that hot summer night. Thank you for reading my story. I hope you enjoyed reading it. I had visited my mother on Monday afternoon, after she and I had a disagreement on the Saturday before. She had called me on a Saturday afternoon and told me she needed to come to her house. I lived in the country at the time, and she lived about 10 miles from me. I'd just been in town with my youngest 2 sons for baseball practice. I also had just taken my only transportation to the shop to have new tires put on, so I had no vehicle to take me anywhere for the day. Our conversation escalated into an argument quickly, and I ended up hanging up the phone after she had not stopped her insistence that I come to her house immediately. She was never this insistent over me coming to pick up some fresh veggies she had gotten from her early garden. On Sunday, I was stubborn, and though I could have gone in to visit all day, I stayed at home. On Monday, I'd taken off work a little early to go to school to watch my sons in a spring sports day. I had about 45 minutes after the sports events before they would be out of school, and I went to see my mother. We talked, and our argument from Saturday was completely forgotten. She and I talked about all 3 of my sons. My oldest is 8 years older than my younger and 10 years older than my youngest, so he was in college and doing well. She told me that she had some problems with asthma lately, but she wasn't going to let it get the best of her. I told her she should really go to the doctor because asthma might not be something to ignore. She said she would be fine. On Tuesday morning, around 2 o'clock, I got a phone call that they were on their way to the hospital with her. I got up, dressed quickly, and drove into the hospital. About 20 blocks from the hospital, I was at a spotlight and thinking that I could run the light because I was the only car around, when I had a warm and comforting feeling fill me. Something told me to take it easy. She was okay and in heaven. Really, it was such a grateful feeling of peace. I got to the hospital, and I knew for sure the way the receptionist at the ER desk met me that she was gone. In the next week after the adjustments, I'd driven my sons to school and was on my way to work. There are some industrial sites at a cross street right before a spotlight, and it can get busy and bottled up. Also, there's a hill going down in the direction of where I was headed. I again felt a warm presence and felt her hand on my arm. Her voice said, "Vicky, look up." Far enough ahead of me was a tractor-trailer truck crossing over my lane into the side street. I'd been in deep thought about so much, but had plenty of time to slow down very preventively, not to have any problems with the truck. She has been with me many times since then, and it is always such a warm, loving feeling. In her life, she dismissed ghosts and paranormal things as if she didn't think it was real. I have no idea if she has ever been with any of my 4 sisters or my brother, but she has definitely been with me. Thanks for reading. When I was about 4 years old, I answered the front door. We had one of those bells that was a knob you would turn on the outside. There, in bright daylight, stood a woman dressed in all pale yellow, in a long dress and matching, colored big brimmed hat. This occurred in the 1950s, around 1959. I let her in. She asked for my mother. I told her I didn't know where she was. She was illuminated. I thought by the sunlight coming through the glass of the front windows and doorway, I was only about 4 years old. Not frightened by her, but rather I was fascinated and mesmerized. I followed her into our living room. She proceeded to sit on the antique Empire couch and kept asking where my mother was, and she seemed very concerned that I was left all by myself at a very young age. After what may have been an hour or so, she got up from the couch and said to me, "Tell your mother that Ada said it was very beautiful and don't be afraid." She then got up, walked to the front door with me following her, and left. When my mother came home, I told her about the lady in yellow named Ada and related her message. My mom almost fainted and fell down on the same spot where Ada sat. She asked me in a very unnerving voice, "Are you sure she said she was Ada?" To which I said yes. Then she said, "My cousin Ada just died a few days ago." At my age then, thankfully, I feared nothing. Ghosts were not in my brain tank, so to speak. Until about 7 years later, I was up in our attic. It was a very old house, looking for stuff to wear for Halloween, and came across the same dress Ada had worn when she showed up as a ghost many years before. It was a dress that had actually belonged to her from when she was young in the early 1900s. Also had a run-in when I was 19 years old. Old same house, with a sea captain. I was lying in my bed, daylight, and I was not asleep, just relaxing. Suddenly, I felt someone was there, next to me, and no one but me and my mom were home. My mom was downstairs watching TV. So, very reluctantly, I slowly looked to my left, and there, standing, was a tall man dressed in a blue uniform with brass buttons with anchors on them. He had no face, just like TV static for a face, but the rest of him was visible. He reached out a huge hand to me and said, "Don't be afraid. I only want to touch your blonde hair." It took me a while to not have a heart attack, until I found my voice. I screamed to my mom. She came running upstairs. I told her what happened, and she said, "You just had a bad dream." I explained to her I wasn't asleep. I knew what I saw, and I was very frightened. She then told me that my most male ancestors on her side of the family were sea captains, and some were lost at sea. She assured me that he didn't want to hurt me, but he almost killed me from fright. I've also had animal ghost visits, and those were of course sad, but that's a whole nother story. Didn't want to bore you. You may now go to sleep. Thanks for reading. I've decided after about a month or two of wandering around your site that I'll add my own story. I noticed your last update was in 2003 or so, therefore, I'm not expecting immediate posting of my tale. Keep in mind, this is the first time I've ever written the story out, so excuse me if I digress or repeat myself. In other stories that I've read, I've noticed people apologizing for extensive background information, so here's my apology/disclaimer. There's a serious pity me. I've had a hard life story involved that needs to be told before the actual ghost story can be understood. Feel free to skip over it, but don't expect to get the whole situation if you do. Oh, and may I add, that I'm not completely looking for sympathy or anything. So that being said, here goes. When I was 14, I was living in a predominantly African American suburb in Illinois. My best friend and I seemed to be the only white teenagers around. Something started one night when someone called my friend's, let's call her Jen's, cell phone. The number showed up on Jen's caller ID as private number, and Jan answered, thinking it might be her parents calling from the restaurant they had gone to. But the other person on the other end started ranting about how Jen was a slutty person and a nasty whore. The caller proceeded to tell Jen that she should just kill herself and get it over with, adding that if Jen didn't commit suicide, the caller and her friends would hunt her down and slaughter her. Jen told the girl to grow up and hung up the phone. She was obviously and understandably shaken up, but she had the sense to star 69 to call. She wrote down the number and informed her parents of the incident when they returned. The next day, Jen's father, being the military man he is, called the number. No one picked up, so he and Jen headed to the police station. The police force in that town was also predominantly black, and when Jen stated that she thought the caller was black because of the way she spoke, the officer behind the desk gave her a dirty look and said he'd look into it and call her in the morning. She never heard from him. Then again, she never got another threatening phone call either. About a month later, Jen and I were walking back to our place from a convenience store about 9 o'clock at night when we heard something walking behind us. We turned around and there was this black girl following us. We didn't recognize her from anywhere, and yet she started screaming the most obscene things I've ever heard, directed at Jen. To this day, and I'm 20 now, I've never heard such awful things come out of a human being's mouth before. This girl, who looked to be about our age, told Jen, "I told you to just kill yourself. I warned you that I'd get you if you didn't." She then stabbed my best friend in the stomach and chest. I was frozen with fear and shock, but I finally jumped on the girl and started punching her with such fury and animal rage that she backed off and ran, but in the scuffle, she slit my arm pretty badly and took off. I started to chase her, intending to tackle her to the ground, not knowing if I wanted to hold her down until someone came to help or if I wanted to just kill her for hurting my best friend. But I quickly decided that Jen needed me, so I went to Jen, ripped my t-shirt off, wrapped it tightly over her wounds, and told her to hang on. I ran back to the store we'd just left, in my bra, which made the most horrifying moment of my life also the most embarrassing, and begged to use the phone. I called the police and explained what had happened and where we were. Then I darted back to Jen, ignoring the blood dripping onto my jeans and the pain in my forearm. I sat there, with Jen's head in my lap, pressing the shirt against her injuries, telling her I loved her and everything would be okay, and that the police said they'd be there with the ambulance as soon as possible. It wasn't soon enough. Jen died in the ambulance. The stab wound to her chest punctured her left lung. She suffocated before even reaching the hospital. I didn't find out until the next morning. It was 2 summers later that I saw her. My family moved to New Jersey soon after the incident, thinking a change of scenery would help me forget. Wrong. Our new home was down the street from a conservation area, where I liked to go and relax on nice days. There was one specific spot that I liked. There was a neat little clearing where just enough sunlight came through the thick trees, and there was a fallen tree that I'd sit on to read or write or whatever. On the other side of the clearing though, there was a spot I wasn't too fond of. There were 6 saplings, taller than I, forming a triangle. I never had a positive vibe from that area. It just felt wrong, not like the rest of the clearing, where I felt peaceful and relaxed. If I walked through those trees, I'd have this overwhelming urge to burst out in tears and hurt something. I never knew why until one day. I was sitting on my tree, smoking a cigarette, and reading Shakespeare when that angry, depressing feeling came over me. The feeling I only got from that triangle of young trees. I ignored it and kept reading, but it grew and grew until I felt like I'd choke on it. So I looked up at the triangle and waited. For what? I had no idea. There was a little smoke coming up from the leaves on the ground, but I wrote that off as lit cigarettes someone had thrown. Then again, since I'd been there for quite a while and hadn't seen anyone around, how could someone have thrown a cigarette in there? so I shrugged it off and kept reading. Then I heard leaves rustling, and the feeling of deep depression intensified. There was no wind, the trees were not swaying, my hair wasn't blowing, but leaves were moving. I raised my head and saw only leaves being pressed into the ground, as if an invisible person were walking across them, and they were coming towards me. Needless to say, I booked it out of there and sprinted home. That night, I woke up unable to breathe, with a searing pain in my stomach. I turned the light on, and just as I did, I caught a glimpse of those familiar blue icy eyes I knew and loved. My best friend. After a few minutes, the stomach pain went away, and I caught my breath and turned the light only to see those eyes again and feel presence on my bed like someone sitting down. I felt like she was sitting there watching me. The corners turned up a little, and something cold touched my cheek. I realized then that the angry/depressed feeling I often got was flashing back to the emotions I had the night she was killed. Angry at the killer and myself, and so very depressed that the best friend I'd ever had was taken away from me. And the pains I had moments before were the same feeling she had when she was taking her last gasp of air. I suddenly felt overpoweringly tranquil. She was here, and she was not angry with me. "I miss you," I said, and went back to sleep. Nothing has happened since, and it's been 3 years. I think she's watching over me every day now, except I know it's her, not by a feeling of extreme sadness, but by the overwhelming urge to smile and make the most of my day. Thank you for reading. I know this was heavy-hearted, but I appreciate you sticking through to the end. Thank you so much. Hey guys, Phantom here, with another quick upload for you guys and everybody who wants one. I really appreciate, again, your viewership, and I'm so thankful that you guys want to share this video, like it, and comment and subscribe. Just kidding. I just assumed you were going to do that because, well, I'm desperate, and like I say, all the time, desperate times call for desperate measures, and this video is a desperate measure, so go share the crap out of it until all the crap comes out. Yeah. No, but seriously guys, nothing more to say other than I'm so thankful as usual for all the viewership, like I say. And good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Also, I have merch available in the description below, so go check that out if you're interested. Seriously guys, I'm not going to buy one because they are crap. No, I'm kidding guys. No, if you want to buy one, go ahead. I'm not going to force anybody to, but they're pretty cool, so I would check them out at least. Anyway guys, bye, love you, good night.